let's get started. So, once again, lots of really good questions as I walked around. If there's not room for questions sort of in the flow of discussion and you still have questions at the end, save them for discussion. We'll ask, hey, did any questions go unanswered within the course of the lesson? Hit it up then. So, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of almost the very end of Ruth chapter 4, let's go ahead and look back at earlier sections in the chapter. And as we look back and think about what's come before, it's going to be really interesting as we move into this last section, how it really contrasts really beautifully with all that we looked at, especially in the introduction and in the early chapters. Sorrow is going to replace joy, and emptiness is going to give way to fullness, and it's just going to be, guys, it's going to be great. But again, let's recap where we've been so far. Guys, we had sandals everywhere, left and right. They were coming fast and furious and playing dodgeball. Okay, so there's only one sandal. But we had the actual exchange where the nameless redeemer says, hey, I'm going to give up this right to redeem the land. And he gives that to Boaz. Boaz is like, booyah, got it all. So he says, hey, I got Ruth as my wife, but we saw his heart was really in preserving the line of Elimelech and honoring him and that family. Then the witnesses gave the blessing, and they were like, oh, Boaz, that's nice, but we want your name to be renowned. We want your name to be remembered. And they asked for God to intervene on behalf of Ruth, that she would be fertile, that she would be honored as well. And sure enough, we got that one teensy tiny little verse that gave us the wedding, conception, and then the baby boy. And we were like, I wanted more, but I will rejoice in this one little verse. And we had the wedding, and now we have the baby boy who is just the hope and dream that we've been waiting for. We're excited. And now let's go ahead and take a closer look, especially at this baby boy. What is so significant about him? What's going on here? So that's where we've been. Let's take a look. Luke chapter 4. We're going to read verses 14 and 15. Follow along on the screen or in the Bible that you have handy. Again, if you need something, we have the pieces of paper over there. They do have this section on it. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. As per our usual, let's start at the very top. Then the women said to Naomi, so who are these women? They just sort of appear in the narrative, and they're like, and the women are here, woohoo! So these are probably, at least all are part of the same group from before in chapter 1. Naomi and Ruth come back to Bethlehem, and the women, then they're like, is this Naomi? Like, oh my gosh, it's Naomi! And then you're like, oh, it's Naomi. Are we sure this is Naomi? Like, oh my gosh. She's like kind of beaten down over there. And then, we have Naomi going off and saying how she's bitter, she's empty, the Lord has done this to her, and the Lord has basically brought calamity into her life. And so this is basically going to be set in contrast with that earlier section. So this is probably, again, that same group of women. Later on in the verses, we're going to get another clue as to exactly who these women are. It's going to say women of the neighborhood. And so, it's the lady down the street who you sent your kids down to. It's the one who you call whenever you need that extra cup of flour. They're the ones who have been rooting for Boaz and for Ruth to be able to get together. And so these are the women in Naomi and Ruth's life. And it's particularly for Naomi because she's the one who's grown up in Bethlehem, grown up in the area, and has just been out these last 10-ish years. So these are the women that we're talking about here. Now, this really personalizes the event and brings it to home. And the interesting thing about this whole blessing, we had some conversation about this last week, is it seems like here and in other parts of the book that we have these blessings that are spoken or these statements that are spoken as if they're in unison by a large group of people, and you're sort of like, what's going on here? Is it one of those musicals where, all of a sudden everybody breaks out and they start dancing and it's choreographed ahead and you're like, wow, that was really oddly spontaneous. But it clearly was not. And so, is this, like, did they rehearse this ahead of time and say, okay, so I'm gonna read, and then we're gonna all together? Probably not. It's possible that, they did have a sort of group blessing. More likely, it's that the narrator's using the women as a literary device, sort of like a chorus, as a literary function within the book. There probably was somebody who gave a blessing, but if you think about, like, if a pastor is going to bless, like, a missionary before they go out, and then the board of elders gets up and, like, they all lay hands, and then you say the board of elders prayed for that group, but only one person prays. So it to me, that makes a little bit more sense that it's, the representative speaking, but they're speaking for the group. And so this blessing's being given. Certainly there's some sort of formulaic notion that's going on here, but it's the chorus is functioning as that outside commentary, like we saw in chapter 1, where they're coming in, and it's not necessarily part of the direct narrative, but the narrator's bringing those voices in so that we can see the bigger picture here. So we've got these women said to who? Naomi. I'm sorry, just the very last verse, I was all about the wedding. I was about the baby. We're going to party. We're going to have, the 1 year celebration. It's going to be Ruth and Boaz, and, we're going to bring cake, and we're at Naomi. What is going on here? So, remember where we started back at the very beginning. Naomi and her family leaving the land of promise with some sketchy faith. Remember, all the rest of the people, basically, of this whole town stayed in Israel, stayed in the land of promise, obeyed and trusted God that he would be able to provide for them even in the midst of the famine. Naomi and her family left and went to a pagan country, Moab, because they had food. And they were like, if I'm weighing these out here, yes, God of the universe, but there's actually food over there. So they, their faith was a little bit sketchy. They did what they thought was good, but not what was best. So they left, and then Naomi returned to Bethlehem in despair and in bitterness. And we've been tracking her faith journey throughout the book. Remember, sort of right in the middle, where Naomi sees that, oh my gosh, it's it's Boaz's field. And we see her in that moment, everything sort of snaps back into focus, and she says, oh, I've not been abandoned. The Lord's been with me this whole time. He's been weaving the threads together this whole way. And at that moment, that's whenever the story really starts to shift. And now we're coming back full circle. What is empty is going to be filled, and what was left forsaken, what's been bitter, is going to be restored. And so that's sort of the story arc that we're tracking, and that's why we're talking about Naomi. I'll be talking about this more and more as we go through, but that's sort of why we're on Naomi here. It's not, at its core, a love story, even though, we that's what we appreciate so much about this. We really enjoy the Boaz-Ruth aspect, but this is a story about faith and faithfulness, and God sovereignly working his plan out through faithful people. So, Naomi, it's going to be great. It's going to be super cool. So, what do they say to Naomi? Blessed be the Lord. So, again, let's pause right there. In other parts of the book, we've been looking at blessings that people are basically praying on people. So the blessings are, blessed be Boaz. May you be blessed by the Lord, Ruth, for under whose wings you've come to find shelter. And so this is functioning differently. Those other ones were, again, direct prayers where they're asking God to bestow blessing. In this situation, this is sort of the opposite response, where God has bestowed blessing, and so they are turning the praise, reflecting that blessing that's been given, back onto God. So this is more like, you could read it, praise the Lord. And if that makes it a little bit more sense in our culture. In this culture, it made sense to use the word blessed, but for us, praise the Lord, thank you, Lord, makes a little bit more sense for us. So, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. So, before we hit this phrase, let's talk about this phrase. Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. Now, throughout this entire time, we've been talking about Boaz and how he accepted the role of the kinsman redeemer. And so it may be possible for you to look at this and think, oh, we're still talking about Boaz. But there's this other interesting phrase, this day. What's happened this day? We had a baby. Yeah. We had a birth. And so the birth of the boy seems to mean that they're not talking about Boaz, but this day we have now a redeemer and it's not going to be functioning in a strict legal sense of the term where the baby's not going to grow up and then like buy land back or anything like that. But he's functioning in the sort of spiritual role of redeemer in that as soon as he's born, he takes the role of nearest relative. He's the one who's going to have the responsibility for the land. And as we're going to talk about down here, he's the one who's going to be the security for Naomi and for Ruth. But again, we're focusing mainly on Naomi into her old age. And so he is now essentially her redeemer. And so now that we know that is what we're talking about here, let's go back to this phrase. Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. Just like in the earlier verses, the narrator directly pinpoints God as the originator of Ruth's conception. Here, too, we see that the narrator is saying, the women see this, too. The people of the town are like, nope, we know. Ruth was married to Mahlon all those years. She was barren. She couldn't have kids. Something was wrong here. The Lord has provided a son. This is his hand that's at work. And so, again, we have multiple witnesses saying, this is direct intervention from on high. It is here. Yes. So, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. So, again, this whole thing, the women are looking at Naomi and they're saying, hey, the Lord is not just about Ruth. It's not just, oh, it's really happy for Ruth. Oh, she has a baby. They're thinking, oh, she's going to be secure long term. Not just short term, long term. Let's take a look at these other verses. This is going to basically expand out here. May his name be renowned in Israel. And again, if we understand that his name is the Redeemer's name, and if we're thinking of this is, we haven't learned his name yet. We're going to learn the son's name is Obed. May Obed's name be renowned in Israel. We had the word renowned pop up earlier. If you guys remember, it means basically called out. May his name be bouncing off the walls, left and right all over the place. So may people know his name in Israel. And again, we're going to talk about this more in just a little bit. It's interesting. His name isn't mentioned outside of either this section or genealogies. And we're going to get back to that in just a moment, but keep that in mind. Called out genealogies. We're going to put those two together in just a minute. So let's continue forward. And again, we're just going to put a little star asterisk. We're coming back. So he shall be a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. This is a typical pairing of Hebrew poetry parallelism where you have the first thought and then the second thought either builds upon or intensifies it in some way. Either sometimes you'll see in Proverbs that there's a line and then there's a contrast, or again, there's some sort of intensification here. So let's look at the first one and then we'll see how the second line builds on that first. So restorer of life. From one sense, you can look at it and think about Naomi's legacy. So her legacy is now going to, literally, it was going to be dead because the line was going to end. And now her family line is going to continue. So that life, in a sense, has been restored. Remember, we talked about how important this was to this culture. It's a little bit different for us today. We don't think about legacy in necessarily the exact same terms or with the same importance. But for them, this was huge. However, I think that there's a deeper meaning particularly for Naomi, and it's the idea of a revival of the spirits. So you can think she's been given new hope, literally that new life. Many of you have witnessed or been around soon after the birth of grandchildren, and there's just something special about, oh my gosh, it's not yours per se, but it is yours. And it's just that we had somebody talking this morning about how they took the grandkids to the park and chased them around all day, and then she came back and she's like, oh. I'm exhausted. And she was still tired today. And she's like, oh my gosh, I have the energy to go out and to be with him. But then I don't know what happens. But there's that new life that's breathed into her because of the birth of this son. And it's Ruth's, but in a sense, it's Naomi's. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And again, there's a contrast with the bitterness and the heaviness from chapter 1. And we're seeing lots of contrast here with this section with the women and in chapter 1. Next, a nourisher of your old age. I do like the Hebrew here. It's literally like to sustain your gray hairs. Like literally just carrying the gray hairs along. Here, I'm going to carry them along. It's all good. It's all good, Grandma. We got you. We got you. But the idea here is, so this is now. Right now, she's been given this revival of spirit. She's feeling on cloud 9. But this is in the future. Whenever you really can't get around. Whenever things are looking a little dim. He's going to be the one who's going to be there. He's the one who's going to sustain you. Who's going to be able to work in the field. Who's going to be able to have those land rights. He's that long-term security for Naomi. And it's really interesting, again, because she was so concerned, chapter 2, chapter 3, in, hey, oh my gosh, my perspective has now shifted. Now I'm thinking about Ruth. I want her to be secure. I want her to have safety. I want her to have a home. And now it's Naomi who will have that security. Not in a husband, but in a grandson. Let's continue forward here. The focus shifts slightly. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Again, there's a lot packed in here, so let's take a look at this first phrase. Your daughter-in-law. Guys, you remember back in chapter 1, Naomi comes back. What does she say? I'm empty. I got nothing. And we were all like, but what about Ruth? And now she's the one who's being highlighted in eminence. She's the one who's like, yes, Ruth. And it's interesting, they highlight her relationship to Naomi. There's that actual familial connection there. And they're saying, hey, the one that you didn't even think was worthy to mention, she's the one who has been the conduit of blessing in your life. She's the conduit of security for you. This girl, Ruth. Yes. Ruth. So, your daughter-in-law who loves you. Guys, anybody have any guesses? What word is here? What Hebrew word? Guys, you would think it's hesed because it's the word we've been talking about this entire time, but it's not! Guys, I can't even tell you what happened whenever I highlighted that word and I saw it pop up on my screen and it was not hesed. And I said, I'm sorry, what? I don't know what to do. I was set to build the lesson around hesed. And this loyal, covenant, faithful, enduring, steadfast love that Ruth has shown this whole time. We've been talking about it over and over, and it's a different word. And I seriously sat and stared for like half an hour, and I was like, I don't know what to do, guys. So let's take a look. What is this word? What does it mean? The word is aheb, A-H-E-B, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, so don't tell Jeff that we learned yeah, it's probably got some growliness in it somewhere because it's Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew. So it's basically, if you look, it shows up in Scripture a lot. It is all throughout Scripture. And it's a Hebrew word, which means that it has a wide range of meaning and a wide range of application. But in situations that are similar to this context, the essential meaning is affection that's based on a close relationship. And so, what we're seeing here, from the women's perspective, is they've seen the outcome of these actions. And what they have perceived is Ruth's deep affection for Naomi. And that close relationship that has prompted her to perform all of these acts of loyal love throughout the entire chapter. Leaving her family, leaving the place that she's grown up, binding herself to this God of Israel, going and working in the fields, saying, you know what, I could choose any guy I wanted, but I'm gonna ask for Boaz, this old guy, who's nice, but he's old. Who knows how long he's gonna live? I know, we said he was like middle-aged. Just bear with me here, okay? So it's their perception. And again, it's this slight shift because we're not doing it from the narrator's perspective directly. We're seeing it from these women's eyes. What do they see? They see affection. They see Ruth's heart here, which is just cool. So it's not said, but it's still cool. I will, you're my lesser love, but I will still love you ahead. It's fine. So let's continue down here. So Ruth, this girl who has shown such deep affection for her mother-in-law, is more to you than 7 sons. So, just right off the bat, this is a major accolade in the ancient time. Like, this is a big deal. Why? So, 7 sons is essentially the ideal family. This is not necessarily in Scripture, but you think of 7 throughout Scripture as the number of perfection, the number of completion, and in tradition, basically different traditions that are passed down, 7 is, if you have 7 sons, you've got it made. I don't know why, but that's what they thought. So they thought a lot of different things. I'm sure a lot of things that we think that people 1,000 years from now will look back at it and say, they thought, what now? So this is just one of those things that they thought 7 sons, that you got it made. 8, too many. 7 was perfect. So, who is more to you than 7 sons? Well, clearly it can't mean more like quantitatively more, because there's Ruth and then there's Obed, and that's 2. So 2 is not more than 7. So clearly the idea is qualitative. She is more than, and the phrase is actually really better than. She is better to you than 7 sons. So how is she better? Well, she's given birth to the Redeemer. And think about it this way. I don't know if you guys have ever just been going through life and you just sort of take things for granted. And think about Naomi back in, before chapter 1 even started. She's just living life in Israel. She's got food. She's got her, life's not easy. Was anything easy in these days? No. But, she was doing the usual Hebrew life, doing her thing. She has her sons. They're not of the best of health, but she's got her sons. And then calamity strikes. She hasn't got any food. Calamity strikes again. No husband. Again, no sons. Now she's empty. And she's hopeless. And she doesn't have in her brain any possibility of a future. There's nothing. She doesn't even have there's not even a possibility in her head that she will have sons, that she will have a future. And here, Ruth brings it about. Through Ruth, she has the Redeemer. And then whenever that hope is restored, all of a sudden, the son, the descendant that she thought she would never have, is all of a sudden so much more valuable because she thought it was impossible. And again, you have to think about your own life. Whenever you lose something, or if you all of a sudden something that you took for granted, it's that you think, oh my gosh, I might lose this now, and it comes into peril. Somebody gets sick. You see freedoms being threatened by the government, whatnot, fill in the blank. Then it becomes that more valuable, that much more precious. And I think that that's sort of the general idea right here, that once you go through the entirety of the situation, that it's that much more valuable. And along with that, just the ideal family it's basically saying Ruth is putting that all to shame. By her loyal, steadfast love, she's just, whatever the ideal family might be, no. Ruth is that much better. She's done all this, and she has come through the final top notch. It's because of the Lord. It's because of the Lord. But through Ruth, you now have a Redeemer. So, that's what the women say. It's pretty awesome. Let's move forward, because we've got to move forward. Yes.
I always have to say one thing. Sorry. But David was the 8th son. Isn't that kind of weird?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of weird. He was that 8th one that made it not the perfect.
Right. Yeah.
He became the king.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so even so much more. The ideal notion. So many of what we think is best. Well, we would think, oh, well, wouldn't it have been so much better if, Elimelech hadn't had died? Well, no, because then we wouldn't have had David. And again, we're seeing God's sovereign hand shaping these circumstances to bring us to, and I'm sort of foreshadowing too much, but David, you guys read it. You guys know. David's coming. David's coming. So, let's go ahead and read through these verses again. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they named him Obed. Guys, I'm not gonna lie. Like I was excited for like this whole section. Like it's shorter. I'm not gonna have a lot of like I'm just gonna breeze through. And I was like, dang it, I've got a lot of questions. This is all confusing. It's all good. So let's start it again at the top. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. So, like I said, I was at this point, like, so I know that we're, like, coming back full circle to Naomi because of the beginning, but what is going on here? This is weird. I don't know. What's going on? So, nurse is not like a wet nurse. So it's not typically used in the context of a wet nurse. It's usually like an attendant, somebody who's nurturing, helping take care of.
I would like
plus
that.
she's kind of, remember, she was too old to bear children, right. So to be like, that's weird, right? Yeah. So that's not the idea of what's going on here. It's basically she's having a substantial role in raising this son, coming alongside, being a large part of their life. And again, anybody who is either in a grandparent role or in a sort of like aunt role or just extra person in the family role where you come in and are able to provide that role of support, of nurture, care. There's something special there. There's something special about that relationship where you get to enter in. And it's interesting too, it's possible as well that there is a little bit of idea of a transfer of not exactly parental authority or anything, because they clearly do still recognize Obed as the son of Ruth and Boaz. It's not like they're like, drop him off at Grandma Naomi's, okay, bye, see you next week, and like on the weekend for a day, and then, no, you're Naomi's now. It's not that idea. But if you remember back earlier, because he's in that role of redeemer, he is recognized a little bit as the son or descendant of Naomi too, because he is going to receive the land that was Elimelech's. He's going to receive the inheritance that was Elimelech's. And so there's a little bit of an idea of transfer of guardianship, but it's not a legal setting. This isn't a courthouse. This is the neighborhood, right? This is the family setting. So it's really more about the idea of Naomi coming in and providing care and nurturing the child rather than a really legal, strict sense here. And it's really cool. This is all gets really symbolic here. The word child, I had a question about, because I'm like, why are we using this sort of generic word child instead of son? Because we're using son all the rest of it here. Well, right in the previous verse, we ended with Ruth, who has given given him birth, essentially, and it ends with the word birth. Now, the Hebrew word for birth is yeled, and then the word for child is yelled. And I'm not saying it right, but the words are very, very close in Hebrew is the idea here. And so, basically, if you remember again, back to chapter 1, Naomi, the one whose arms were emptied of her men, are now being filled by this child. Where there was once death, there is now life. There is birth. There is hope. She's being restored. This is all about the restoration of Naomi, which again is just cool, man. So she has the child, laid him on her lap, became his nurse. So again, we have this sort of familial, comforting, restorative scene. And now the women again are going to provide some commentary here. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. Once again, I had lots of questions. So, the women of the neighborhood, we get a little bit more detail, again, of the neighborhood. It's that the lady down the street, your next door neighbor, across the cul-de-sac. So, the people who know them. And the fact that it's emphasized again here that it's not just they don't just include this in that one first line that he brings back. And the women said, seems to indicate that this is sort of the climax statement. This is the big oorah. So, gave him a name, saying a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. Again, the Hebrew's a little bit imprecise here, but some commentators, a few, think that they did, in fact, actually name this kid. It's possible. You can read the text like that. If that's so, this is legitimately the only time in the ancient history where like some group of people comes and does this. So if that's the case, it's very abnormal. But it's a possible interpretation. So if you're like, I'm going to go with that, that's fine. It's a possible read of the text. Other commentators suggest that this is them not naming the child, but affirming the name that's been chosen. That they maybe were in on the process a little bit, but it wasn't just these women came in and said, looks like an Obed. Yeah, looks like an Obed to me. Mm-hmm. Yep, sorry, no, you want a Daniel? No, he's not a Daniel. What are you smoking? Stop that. No, so it seems to be that they pick the name Obed, and the women are saying, yes, this right here, a son has been born to Naomi, is a traditional sort of birth announcement, and so they're coming around. This is sort of like the equivalent of gender reveal party plus first year birthday plus pick your symbolic holiday type of thing that we do today. This is just, they're gathering around, they're celebrating the birth of the son, and they are rejoicing with them together. So, regardless, they either picked the name or they really liked the name Obed. So let's talk about Obed, and then we're gonna come back to this. I promise. So Obed directly means the one who serves. It can be a shortened form of Obadiah, which means servant of the Lord. So whether you're talking about, if it's a shortened form of Obadiah, they're saying it is appropriate for him to be named this. He's the agent of God who's coming in to basically serve Naomi in the role of that redeemer, to be the one who sustains her, to be the one who gives her new hope. Or just Obed, one who serves. He's legit going to be the one who someday Boaz is going to die too. Who knows when. But this kid is going to be the one who's going to help mom out. Grandma, whatever. You get the idea. He's going to be the one who's going to go work in the fields. He's going to be the one helper. He is Naomi's servant. And not in like a slave, although, again, would it be so bad? But no, this is a gracious servanthood. This is a joy. The one who originally, again, who's going to be alone, hopeless, empty, without a hope, without a future, now she has a grandson. Now, I say grandson, verse says son. What's going on here? A son has been born to Naomi. I've got all sorts of confusion here. First of all, son does not necessarily mean biological mother-son relationship. It can just mean descendant. Similarly, in the verses that we're going to look at next week, father does not necessarily mean father. And that's going to be really important for us to be able to understand how the genealogy works in time. So we're going to take a look at that next week. We're going to get a timeline out. Guys, it's going to be so exciting. I hope you're ready. So son, descendant. All right? A descendant has been born to Naomi. Now again, our focus is on Naomi because she's the one who was empty back in chapter 1. She's the one who doesn't have something. And that bitterness, which we saw in chapter 1, is now being canceled out. And I think it's really interesting, too. There's really no, even whenever we see Ruth and Boaz getting married, even before the son is there, we think, okay, well, Naomi seems to be doing pretty well. Like her faith seems to be in a really good spot. But at this point, there's no possible room for bitterness left. And think about why she was so bitter. She had no husband. She had no sons. And she had no grandsons. Think about it. If Ruth or Orpah had had a child, this whole story wouldn't have needed to take place. There would have been a grandson already. There's no need for a redeemer. So maybe she even had some bitterness in her heart against Ruth. Gosh darn it, Ruth, couldn't you have had one? Just one. I only needed one. But now, the son has been born. Both the descendant, literally, and figuratively. The son, the one who is entering into the role to fill her arms again, and she's filled. The Lord has graciously restored her. Talked about that already. Going out of order from my notes. How dare I? So, as we finish off verse 17. So, they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. David's coming, guys! And here, the narrator clues us in to the big picture of why he's been telling this entire story. Because, he could have ended it somewhere up there with, I would have been happy with marriage. We could have ended it right there, and maybe and Naomi was really happy and then ended right there, right? That would have been a good story, a good tracking of even Naomi's faith. But no, we've got this genealogy that's coming, and so we know that the author is up to something more. Naomi is not just being restored in the sense of what she has lost, but it's so much bigger. It's so much bigger. The greatest descendant in basically the narrator's mind. He doesn't quite know about Jesus, so we will forgive him that. But David is the biggest person that could be named in Israel's history. Maybe apart from Abraham and Moses, right? And so David is the one who is coming, and it's brought about because of Boaz, because of Ruth, and it's that great restoration for Naomi. But it's not even so much about Naomi at this point. It's about a bigger picture. Think back to whenever we said, may his name be renowned. May his name be called out in Israel. His name is only known because he's the ancestor of David. He's the key. The son who was born is the ancestor. If any other son, any other scenario, we wouldn't have gotten David. He's the linchpin. He's the key in this story, whose name is now called out because we get David because of his birth. What? So cool. And we don't read about Obed anywhere else. It's just here. This is why we know him. It's because of David. So cool. So, again, we see here, we get this really happy feeling. We all the major characters have been rewarded for their faith. We've seen Naomi even in her sort of up and down, left and right, tumbling all over the place. And we see her back and she's restored and God is gracious. And we're this is awesome. And we've got the king coming. And so, can it get any better? Maybe. We'll take a look next week. But that's all we've got for today. So, next week, we're going to be finishing Ruth. I know, it's a little bit depressing. But I will try not to cry too much because the Chosen series is starting up right after, and I am psyched out of my mind. So, we're going to finish up Ruth chapter 4 next week. There are papers over there for you. We're going to be doing days 3 through 5 in session 6 of the Kelly Minter book. That's all I've got.
If you haven't signed up for the Chosen Study and you're coming, if you could sign up, this is especially important if you will be needing childcare, because we're hiring babysitters as we speak. Well, we're not as we speak, but
Literally right this second.
it's in the works. I'm doing a deal with my phone right now.
You weren't paying attention to me?
I paid attention to you this morning. What are you asking me? Of course I was.
That's it, I quit.